tonight's debate. My name is Aditi and I'm the chairman, and Stella is the timekeeper. The adjudicator is Mr. Hemsley. The topic of girls, and the negative team is also Miss Girls. The speaking time for tonight's debate is 6 minutes. A single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. A continuous bell may be rung 30 seconds after the speaking time, in which case the speaker must sit down immediately. Please ensure that your mobile phones and other electronic devices are switched off. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Faisal.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that Turnbull should have stayed in Parliament until the next election. We, the affirmative team, believe this statement to be true. We define Turnbull as Malcolm Turnbull, the 29th and previous Prime Minister of Australia. We define Parliament as the group of elected politicians responsible for making laws for Australia, which consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate. We define the next election as the process of voting for the next Prime Minister and party due to take place sometime in the next 9 months, the latest date being the 18th of May next year, according to the Australian Electoral Commission. Today, as first speaker, I'll be talking to you about how Turnbull ignored his obligation to Parliament and the people of Australia, and how his resignation will affect how the public vote for the Liberal Party at the next election. Our second speaker, Emily, will be explaining how Turnbull leaving the Parliament now has caused a lot of cost and time for the Liberal government, including an expensive by-election which will use our tax money. Our third speaker, Abby, will rebut and sum up our team case. Now on to my points. My first point is that through leaving Parliament altogether after the recent change in leadership, Turnbull is ignoring his obligation to Parliament and the public that elected him to represent them. It was in 2016 when compulsory elections took place around Australia and Turnbull was voted Prime Minister on the 2nd of July. Due to a recent leadership spill, however, Turnbull has now left Parliament, leaving Australia with the new Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. This is incredibly unfair to the people who voted for Turnbull, as he was elected to serve a full term. This shows the respect and popularity he had amongst his people, and due to him winning the election, Turnbull had an obligation to serve the full term. He had countless projects to finish, like the $7.6 billion roads and rail package, the funding of Catholic schools, as well as promises he had to fulfil, one of them promising a better economy for Australia, which has not yet occurred. The elections are also such a tedious and politically significant time, with the most recent federal election in 2016 spanning over an 8-week campaign period, according to the Australian Electoral Commission. The Australian majority shouldn't stand for nothing, while Turnbull just abandons his post like that. As a result, the people are angry and are losing faith and trust in the Liberal Party, which leads me on to my second point. With a line of politicians leaving after Turnbull and a number of Australian citizens withdrawing their support, the Liberal Party will definitely have difficulty getting votes at their next election. The imbalance of experienced and well-respected politicians has escalated as both Turnbull and Julie Bishop have left. Because of the absence of strong politicians and candidates for Prime Minister, there is a strong possibility of a swinging Parliament at the next election. The people will take their anger out at the next election, with many having decided to vote for the Labor Party for the first time in years. A Reachtel poll published just recently and funded by the Australia Institute found that the Liberals' margin had been completely eroded, with Labor and Liberal now neck and neck. With Turnbull in Parliament, even as Minister or backbencher, he would have been able to educate and provide support and advice to his fellow politicians, strengthening the Liberal Party. His experience serving as Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party would be no doubt useful to the politicians, especially to the new Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. Turnbull being in Parliament for longer meant he would have been able to easily contact Scott Morrison about the previous international relations and provide a greater understanding of current events, especially between China and the USA. What the Liberal Party don't need is Turnbull leaving the Parliament entirely, as it is important that a party shouldn't be voted in as it is more popular or by the process of elimination. Rather, the Labor Party shouldn't be the more favourable choice purely because the Liberal Party is weak. There should be a fair contest where both parties have something to offer and people can vote based on their personal values. Instead, Turnbull's move means people are voting for the Labor Party because they have no other choice. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we, the affirmative team, strongly believe that Turnbull should have stayed in Parliament until the next election. Not only have people lost support in Turnbull, but in the Liberal Party as well. Turnbull, who was elected Prime Minister, had an obligation to serve his full term and to serve the people. But as a result of his actions, the Liberal Party have suffered the loss of excellent politicians and the support of many Australians. Australia did not ask for a new Prime Minister, and as a consequence, many will take it out on the Liberal Party at the next election. Thank you.
I call upon the first negative speaker, Zara Stefani.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that Turnbull should have stayed in Parliament until the next election. We, the negative team, believe this statement is false. We agree with the definition given by the opposition. Today, I'll be speaking to you about the many issues caused by having an ex-Prime Minister on the backbench. Our second speaker will explain how it is harder for people to pledge allegiance to a new Prime Minister when Malcolm is still present and how the situation cannot change. Our third speaker will rebut and sum up our team's case. Before I begin my speech, I'd like to point out some flaws in the opposition's first speaker. She has tried to tell you that Turnbull was well respected by his peers. However, how can this be when he was not elected for Prime Minister when he was challenged by Scott Morrison? This clearly disputes this argument that he did not have as many supporters as he would have hoped. Now to my first point. It has become blatantly obvious with the previous Prime Minister that having an ex-Prime Minister on the backbench is not in Australia's best interests. The Liberal Party brought about internal fighting when Turnbull challenged the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, to his leadership. This leadership spill caused the Liberal-led government to become very unstable. In fact, this instability has continued throughout Malcolm Turnbull's leadership, allegedly instigated by his predecessor, Tony Abbott. This is a testament to the fact that the ex-Prime Minister should not remain in Parliament on the backbench. We have now seen the same scenario happen again with the challenge to Malcolm Turnbull's leadership. If Malcolm Turnbull was to remain in Parliament on the backbench, this will only continue to fuel the instability in the Liberal Party, ultimately causing destruction to the job of being government on the day. If Turnbull was to leave Parliament, it would put a stop to the endless fighting and instability and finally lead to having a secure government. Unlike Turnbull, Julia Gillard retired from politics on the 5th of August 2013 after losing the leadership of the Labor Party due to a leadership spill. Many politicians at the time believed that this was the best thing to do, with Australia's best interest at heart, including Malcolm Turnbull, who stated, "I made it very clear that I believe former Prime Ministers are best out of Parliament, and I don't think there's much evidence to suggest that that conclusion isn't correct." Turnbull himself suggested that it was stupid to continue in politics after losing Prime Ministership. In modern day politics, no serving Prime Minister who has lost the Prime Ministership by either the election or within the political party, apart from Kevin Rudd, has been successful, so there is no point in staying if he is not going to further advance. There is no plausible reason that warrants the presence of our former Prime Minister in Parliament. Malcolm is not the first Prime Minister to step down, and he certainly won't be the last. Secondly, With the opportunity of having new leadership comes new opportunities and policies that may advantage and better Australia. Turnbull leaving Parliament would give the Liberal Party the opportunity to rest with a new leader and the possibility of improved popularity amongst the electorate. With the amount of instability that Turnbull previously caused, this would be a good opportunity for the party to refocus and perform as a better Australian government. However, how is this meant to be achieved if the person that you're turning against is still present? It simply can't and it won't. Therefore, the Australian government will never progress with Turnbull still in Parliament. Malcolm Turnbull resigning from politics will allow new leadership to present new ideas and direction, ultimately with a view to winning the next election. With Turnbull currently in Parliament, the Liberal Party will unlikely win the next election due to the lingering of his unpopular policies associated with the energy reduction scheme and proposed company tax cuts to big businesses. Put bluntly, with Turnbull gone, the Liberal-led government of the day will be more focused and driven on implementing policies for the betterment of all Australians. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the government will not only be in a worse position in having the ex-Prime Minister on the backbench, but it will also cause instability within the government and the Liberal Party, and distract the government from focusing on policies for a better Australia and all Australians. By leaving politics, Malcolm Turnbull has definitely done the Liberal Party a favour, but now has he done Australia a favour? Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Emily Lowe.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, the topic for our debate is that Turnbull should have stayed in Parliament until the next election. And myself and my fellow peers on the affirmative team highly believe this statement is true. Before I move on to my points tonight, I would like to first address some of the flaws in the opposition's argument. The first speaker has tried to tell you that about the negatives of having an ex-PM on the backbench, and that by having an ex-Prime Minister, he would sabotage the government like the ex-Prime Minister Tony Abbott did, and create an instability within the government, and that there is no point in him staying because he can't bring any positives to the government at this stage. However, this isn't true, because by Turnbull leaving the government would actually cause more instability. Changing Prime Ministers already disrupts the economy and current jobs within Parliament. Not only this, but if he wanted to sabotage the government, he would want to stay in Parliament, not resign. Rather than keeping him in Parliament would help to continue the movements and projects he's already started. Our first speaker has already explained how by Turnbull leaving, he will be ignoring his obligation to the Liberal Party, the government, and the population of Australia, and how by leaving before the end of his term, he would be negatively impacting the Liberal Party. Tonight, I will be showing you why Malcolm Turnbull should have stayed in Parliament, because by him leaving, the projects which he has put in place could be left unfinished and result in wasted tax money. It could also cause a by-election, and will cause a by-election at this stage, as well as the legislations that he has changed could be changed back. If Malcolm Turnbull was to leave Parliament before the end of his term, would mean that there needs to be a by-election in Wentworth in order to fill his seat. He currently holds the Wentworth seat in the Liberal, which is progressive. So if he were to leave, they would lose the only person that is progressive and well-liked. If they were to hold another election, the most probable outcome would be that the person voted in would not represent how the public wanted them to vote in due to the lack of time. Moreover, if Wentworth switched to Labour, if there was a by-election, then the parties would be neck to neck and the government would have even seats, which would again lead to more instability within Parliament. By-elections also cost a phenomenal amount of money to run. In 2015, the by-election for the Canning seat cost a grand total of over $2 million, which was taken out of the government's budget, which was the public's tax money. Not only this, but by having a by-election will prolong the actions as everyone will be focused on the election rather than other issues that could be answered using the same tax money, such as our refugee crisis, illness in Nauru, and closing the gap campaign. So essentially, if Turnbull was to leave, who most of the country supported as he was voted in for Prime Minister, more of their tax money would be wasted trying to replace him rather than on the causes that he was voted in for trying to solve. My second point is that we will be wasting tax money if Malcolm Turnbull was to leave before the end of his term in Parliament. During his time as Prime Minister, he started to spend national funds towards consistent spending towards defence programmes, expansion and support of education programs, and has started and completed dam and rail standardizations such as Chowilla and the railway from Sydney to Melbourne. Many of these are in the process or have just begun and therefore have cost a lot of tax money to begin. If he were to leave Parliament, then it is highly likely that these initiatives could be stopped with no one to help promote them, thus ending in a waste of tax money. In 2017, the Australian government received $488,499 million total, with the Commonwealth government receiving $389,797 million. This sum of money is what the public pays to help get the changes they want, such as dams, better railroads, and better education programs. By leaving these started projects unfinished would be a waste of valuable tax money which could have been used for other purposes. Therefore, by Turnbull staying in Parliament to help complete and run these programs would be a progressive state. My third point is that while Turnbull has been Prime Minister, he has been able to achieve as a Prime Minister free medical treatment for pensioners and dependents, deducts tax fees for school fees, and achieved homosexual marriage rights. He has introduced capital grants to mental hospitals and aiding for teaching hospitals, introduced the needs for improvements such as national divorce laws and drugs, and introduced medical health benefits scheme to allow free life-saving drugs for those in need. These positive steps forwards could be easily reversed if he were to completely remove himself from Parliament. Turnbull was voted in for these promises. However, if he decides to leave politics for good, his party could easily reverse these legislations and movements once again. If he stayed until the next election to help protect the changes he's made and continue the movements he has begun, it would help to ensure that it would be progress. The progress would not be reversed. Furthermore, if they were to change it, it would be unfair on the public, like our first speaker has mentioned, as the public voted him in for his promises to change, not for the party. By continuing until the next election and protecting these progressions would also guarantee that the positive changes would be upheld to help persuade the public to vote for either party, as the party which promises to withhold and further expand on these changes is what the public will vote for. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Turnbull should stay in Parliament until the next election because of the fact by leaving would cause another by-election, both wasting our time and money rather than trying to solve more important issues, to prevent tax money from being wasted on projects that have just begun, from being left or abandoned by the government, and lastly, to prevent the legislations that both Australian citizens and Turnbull have worked hard to pass from being reversed. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Sienna Quincy.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that Turnbull should should have stayed in Parliament until the next election. We, the negative team, strongly disagree with this statement. I will now point out some flaws in the opposition's case. The first affirmative speaker has tried to tell you it's unfair for the Australian people that Turnbull was not able to finish his term. This is wrong, as although yes, you have to vote for who you think would be the best PM for Australia, you also have to take into account what party they are coming from, as the process of becoming PM also includes Liberal forming government in Australia, as well as voting for Turnbull. Therefore, to say that Turnbull should stay in Parliament because of this is wrong, as they voted for the Liberal Party as well, which Scott Morrison himself, the new PM, is from. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that due to the by-election, they have the new Liberal elected, if elected, would not have the open-minded views that Turnbull has. But this is the fallacy of a slippery slope, as we cannot just assume the new member sitting for Wentworth won't have these open-minded views. Therefore, this is not a reason for him to stay in Parliament. My first point is that people in Parliament find it hard to pledge allegiance to a new Prime Minister whilst their former leader is present. My second point is that the members of Turnbull's party were distracted with his presence, and with him there continuing his role, the situation wouldn't be changed. Now to my first point. It would be extremely detrimental to the country if Malcolm Turnbull stays in Parliament, as this would increase the difficulty of pledging allegiance to the new Prime Minister while their previous leader is there. In his resignation speech, he said, and I quote, "I have a strong view which I've made very clear publicly, so it comes as no surprise that former Prime Ministers are best out of Parliament, not in it." And I think recent events best underline the value of that observation. Turnbull was forcefully pushed from being PM from his party, and he said it himself. Due to this, pledging allegiance to a new PM while the previous PM is there who got wrongly treated would be highly unproductive for the Australian government. Additionally, this is not only making it harder for the government to function efficiently, but most importantly, it would result in numerous consequences for the people of Australia. We're a thriving country, and although we are very fortunate, we are far from perfect, and any disruptions in our government, such as this one, could send us back in time and stop our country moving forward. Not only is it hard to create a supportive party, but it also adds complications when passing laws through government. In order for any alterations or additions to be made to any bills, the orders must require all an agreement between all members in the parties. If not everyone agrees, then the bill will be prohibited. If our own government cannot come to a common decision, how is our country meant to progress and advance in the future? Ultimately, Turnbull should step down from Parliament, as it is in the best interest of Australia, and his presence would only increase the difficulty of pledging allegiance to a new Prime Minister. My second point is that the members of Turnbull's party are distracted and divided with his presence, which is why he needs to leave Parliament. While in Parliament, his presence was disliked for opposing the Conservative values. Furthermore, they are ignoring ongoing circumstances arising in Australia, and his own party are distracted from their role, focusing on internal issues instead. Turnbull himself said, "Due to this sort of disloyalty and deliberate insurgency, it is the best way to describe it, deliberate destructive action. There is serious tension between the party members, and Australia's best interests will not be the focus of the party until Turnbull has left Parliament. Therefore, Turnbull should not stay in Parliament until the next election, as his party are disunited and distracted with him there, therefore not making it in Australia's best interest." In conclusion, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Turnbull should definitely not stay in Parliament until the next election. Thank you.
I call upon the third affirmative speaker, Abby Lyle.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of this evening debate is that Turnbull should stay in Parliament until the next election. We, the affirmative team, believe that this statement is true. Tonight I'll be summarising my team's case, but before I do that, I would like to point out some obvious flaws in the opposition's debate. When the first speaker stated that once Turnbull has left the party, the endless fighting will stop. Unfortunately, this just isn't true. In the past 5 years, there have been 5 different Prime Ministers. Due to the leadership spill, the fighting hasn't stopped and never will stop. We can't put the blame on Turnbull when this has happened many times before. After every spill, the Australian population thinks, finally, a stable Prime Minister, a stable government. Yet every time, something goes wrong. A new Prime Minister comes in and has a leadership spill, and then we have a new one. Blaming this on Turnbull is first false, and the fighting between parties aren't likely to stop anytime soon. The first speaker also spoke about how this would not be the last leadership spill. Yet, earlier in her speech, she talked about how by getting Turnbull to resign from Parliament, this would quote-unquote stop the endless fighting and we will finally have a stable government. Yet, as I've already talked about, this isn't the first leadership spill, and as the opposition stated, it won't be the last. The first speaker has tried to tell you that Turnbull is not respected by his fellow politicians and should leave Parliament. However, this does not relate to the question of if he should stay in Parliament or not. Turnbull would only need to leave if a leadership spill had come around. Respect is not relevant. As your second speaker's rebutted stated, Malcolm Turnbull was not popular and got kicked out of his position of Prime Minister, with majority voting him out. So why would they be distracted by him or find it hard to pledge their allegiance to their new Prime Minister? They've already kicked him to the curb. Him being there is only to help the country and the government, not to sabotage. As my second speaker stated, he resigned at his own will. If he wanted to distract his party, he would have left. Also, by staying, he is there to help younger politicians to make our country better. It was all in good faith. Turnbull leaving Parliament would actually cause more instability. Changing Prime Ministers disrupts the economy, current jobs in Parliament. So, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I have rebutted the negative team's arguments. My first speaker has spoken about how Turnbull ignored his obligation to Parliament and the people of Australia. Also, how his resignation will affect the Liberal Party at the next election. My second speaker spoke about how Turnbull leaving the Parliament now has caused a lot of cost and time for the Liberal government and will now cause a by-election. So, ladies and gentlemen, we the affirmative team agree with the statement that Turnbull should have stayed in Parliament until the next election. Thank you.
now call upon the third negative speaker, Ellie Anderson.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. As previously stated, the topic for tonight's debate is that Malcolm Turnbull should stay in Parliament until the next election. We, the negative team, strongly disagree with this statement. I would like to start out by pointing the recurring themes in the opposition's arguments. The first theme is that Turnbull leaving Parliament is denying his obligation to fulfil his full term. Another theme brought up was that Labor might win the next election. The third theme was the huge cost of a by-election, and lastly, that the opposition brought up was that if Liberal don't win Malcolm's seat of Wentworth, we will have a hung Parliament. I will start by rebutting the first theme, how by leaving Parliament, Turnbull is ignoring his obligation to fulfil his full term. However, Turnbull clearly isn't interested in having a future in Parliament, so it would be a disservice to his constituents for him to sit in Parliament for another 9 months with no ambition to pursue his political career. If you look at the debate from the perspective of the people within Turnbull's electorate of Wentworth, they deserve a chance to vote on who represents them in Parliament, whether they're Liberal, Labor or Independent. Why should they have to be represented by a politician who has no interest or desire to be there? Now the second idea, how Labor might make government at the next election. However, if Labor do make Parliament in the next election, it will not solely be because of the seat of Wentworth and Malcolm Turnbull stepping down from the seat. It will be because of the recent leadership spill and dissatisfaction from the Australian population with the Liberal Party. Turnbull leaving Parliament will not be the sole reason Labor made government. Additionally, why is this a reason Turnbull should stay? Who's to say that Labor winning at the next election isn't in the best interest of the Australian people? Now on to the third thing, the cost of the by-elections. I'm not denying the fact that by-elections are expensive. However, it must also be considered the amount of time and therefore money wasted behind closed doors on meetings and lobbying. Politicians will be distracted from their true purpose, which is to consider and debate legislation and consult their constituents. But if Turnbull stays in Parliament, time will be wasted trying to debate legislation, which can be made difficult by a Prime Minister on the backbench, especially one that may not agree with the current Prime Minister's policies, as proven by our first speaker. Time is money in politics, and so yes, by-elections can be expensive, but the cost of having a potentially disgruntled former leader remaining in Parliament can be greater. Case in point, Tony Abbott, whose disruptive behaviour has cost taxpayers huge amounts of time and money, as mentioned by our first speaker. I will now finally address the fact that the seat of Wentworth may not be won by the Liberal Party. However, the seat of Wentworth is a very safe Liberal seat. The Liberal Party have held the seat uninterrupted since its founding in 1944. It is currently considered the 8th safest coalition seat in Australia, with a margin of 17.7%. Clearly, although a by-election needs to be held by default, it won't make the impact that people think it will. Based on the facts and the numbers, it is most likely to be won by the Liberal Party. I will now summarise my team's case. Our first speaker spoke to you about the issues caused by having an ex-Prime Minister on the backbench. She addressed the fact that it's not in Australia's best interest to have Turnbull on the backbench because it's unstable for the government. Her second point was that if Turnbull doesn't stay in Parliament, there is an opportunity for new leadership, especially since Turnbull has no interest in pursuing a career in Parliament. Our second speaker explained that people in Parliament find it hard to pledge allegiance to a new Prime Minister while their former leader is still present. Her second point was that the members of Turnbull's party were distracted with him present, and if he remains in Parliament, the situation won't change. Yes, there may be no point in him leaving because the next election is only 9 months away, but the negative consequences of Turnbull staying in Parliament are far greater than if he leaves. As we previously stated and proved, a lot can happen in 9 months, and having Turnbull sit in a seat with no interest to pursue a future in Parliament is unfair to his constituents and the Australian government as a whole. Thank you.